everybody. I'm Colin Hobson, CEO of OpenSpatial, and I look forward to taking half an hour and just going through this topic today on data quality and how to track that. So the topic here is dealing with your data. So it's an assumption that you have a bunch of GIS data. That can be utility data, it can be anything, environment or market related or any of that sort of thing. Just a little bit about OpenSpatial. We have offices in Australia, where our head office actually is these days. And then we have an office in California where I am, and an office in South Africa. We have actually 2 offices there. In terms of our solutions, we have a suite of solutions that go from construction, design, and automate in AC/DC here, automate the movement of data directly into GIS. So from CAD, we actually validate, we set up those drawings, and you can literally push the button to check that you've got all the data you need and make a full electronic process for loading your data. And then Munsys is a workhorse of data management, capture, and an update with the rules-based GIS, and then Enlighten is our web-based tool. So we kind of cover a whole range there. We also have AC/DC runs, has a portal version, so that's in the cloud. We also have even customers that have moved their entire Munsys everything into the cloud, and we are Oracle. We have our own Oracle instance and use Oracle Analytics and AI in the Oracle Analytics cloud, so there's that as well. And we're also tying in with a bunch of different visualization platforms, being able to go from data capture all the way into asset management through GIS and digital twins directly. So just to give you an idea on what that is. But today, we're looking at data quality. So to get to all of this, you have a lot of data, and a lot of our customers have very comprehensive data sets. And so we'll just look through that. I'll use a couple of examples. And what I'm talking about today is essentially something we've had developed, and it is based pretty much customer by customer, but the concepts are more or less the same. And so we roll that out so that customers can track their data. So why do we want to track data quality and completeness? Pretty much, if you're making data-driven decisions, you really need to be confident in your information. The data that we're talking about, a large part of our customers are utilities or cadastral, and those are decisions that really do require data for decision making. Those are disciplines, should I say, that require data for decision making. So poor data, incomplete data is going to provide bad decisions. The other thing is there's no reason we cannot, in fact, measure completeness and quality. It just depends on how detailed you want to be, but that measuring of that shows you how you are improving or not over time, and it also allows you to prioritize where you need to build out the better data. And so it also then provides a level of confidence in the information. So making a decision on something critical is going to be much better if you think the data's 98% good and accurate and complete. Or if you think the data is 50 to 60%, you really are going to be making a decision that's not quite there. So to do that, you need to determine, well, what do you want to track? So which data? We'll talk about that. How do you identify? And I can give some insights into how we've done that with others and look at that. And then also, how do you actually do it? What do you do? What are the techniques? So this, I'm going to go all the way down to the what and how. Using an example, it's not an example that's going to fit with everybody, but certainly the concept absolutely can be applied. It is based on the Munsys data setup, so database-driven GIS, and you pretty much would be able to apply similar concepts, but we've scripted that out. So could you do it yourself? Well, probably if you have good DBA. Do you want to do it yourself? Well, there's a lot of things we've put into that over time, and it may be a lot easier for us to just repeat that for you. So just very high level. I'm going to come back to this slide, but essentially folks have feature data for all of your geographic features, and from there we can get summary statistics, and then we aggregate that and we're trying to get kind of a score to get an idea of how complete comparatively any given data set is, how much data do you have, and how good is that data. And ultimately you want a single number of your data health, if you want, or your data quality. And that gives you an idea. So that number, as long as you repeat the methodology the same, we can go through and look at how much and measure that. And if we track it over time, we can run these sets of analytics all the way from, what pipes have diameter or not, to which ones have age or not, and track that over time so that you can know. 4 years ago, we had a single measure of X% or score, and now we have a score that's this value. So it just depends on how you do that. Which data should be tracked? The data for quality and completeness, it all kind of depends on what your priorities are. So within an organization, I actually usually ramp it up and say, what are the organizational priorities? So if you're a utility, you're looking at things like level of service, aging out of assets, replacing assets, and you need the data to support those decisions. You need that data. So you want to qualify that data within your data set and track those specifically. So that's kind of one of those things. So a couple of things to look at is how important is accuracy. We have a few airports as customers, and the locational accuracy of their directional beacons and all of their location stuff for landing and takeoffs, that actually requires by law an accuracy certainly in the US of less than a foot. So, we're looking here at really within centimeters of accuracy. Other stuff like maybe if you're looking at soil types, the boundary between one soil type and another, that level of accuracy, it could be anything from 50 meters. It's a transition and you're just drawing a line. So your locational accuracy does depend on the priorities, what kind of feature it is. There can be legal service requirements and level of service requirements as well. Some water authorities, if they shut off the water to a customer more than 3 times in a year, they get fined. So you want to know then, do we have all our customers listed in the data set? Also, if you're planning a whole new expansion or replacement, you might want to prioritize that data and know that you've got good quality or not, and then replace it. So the critical information is things like age, size, and then cost and risk. You notice I don't actually have condition in here because that's sort of outside of the GIS. It's asset management. It's a critical factor. And so, depending on what your goal is, if your goal is to do a replacement planning, then yeah, you're going to want to know what's the condition. But you could substitute that for age. So you could substitute age in large part and then override just those ones that are outliers. So these are of somewhat critical aspects. So once again, those are determined by your organization. So if we back up all the way, any given organization is going to have some kind of mission or charter. This is an example of, say, a water utility, and they're going to have level of service. So they want to make sure they got accurate billing and customers and financial asset management stuff, just in-ground inventory, how old is it, what is the replacement cost, and all of those sorts of things. And then planning, if a new development goes in, what capacities do we need and stuff like that. On our side from the company, and I just leave that in, but we kind of support these technology stacks on the right to sustain all of the types of decisions. So in the middle, I'm going to put up a whole set of examples that go from raw data all the way to high-level planning. So these would be some items to bear in mind what an organization does. And I list them here because if the focus of determining water leaks or repair prioritization or planning and design, if those are the items that are critical within your organization, then you're going to need, for example, the water leak data, and you're going to want to relate that to diameter, material, and age, and maybe even some environmental factors like soil type or trees or whatever. So these, and I just use some examples, I'm not going to cover all of these, but these kinds of aspects determine what data you need to track and what's critical. So just to look at that, give you an idea. If you're looking at where to shut off stuff, then you're going to be fairly focused on all of the topological connectivity within your network. So the number of pipes that don't connect to nodes and you can't run, that would become a fairly important metric to track over time. So we look at that. Notice I've also put in data accuracy and completeness as part of the mission because it's fundamental down at the bottom for where your data comes in. So anyway, just to set the scene on prioritizing. So in terms of data, it's identifying which things are critical, even down to the columns. We certainly think age or install date, if you will, is better. One of the things that's also used worldwide is subsurface utility engineering levels of data quality. In the US, there's a standard. Australia has its own standard, but this is a simple measure for data quality where it's A, B, C, or D. And it goes essentially from based on whether it was just somebody sort of said, oh yeah, there's that thing over there, or all the way down to, all the way up, should I say, to it's visually verified, it's been surveyed, it's documented, and it's been checked. Typically, a level of A or B using this metric is accepted as reasonably good data. Anything C or D means you probably want to go figure it out. So if it's important data, then those would be there. The other one is you can rely on people, and it's built into this set, but it's amazing how people can remember where things are, what they are, and a lot of that's carried in people's brains. And if they're leaving the organization, they're retiring, you kind of want to extract as much info as you can. But people can look at something and say, no, this is over there, not here. Or no, that one is, that one's more important than this one, or condition is bad, or all of that stuff will help you. And also to say, no, this map is wrong. And you want to engage in that. I just mentioned the people part is very important in that equation. The other one is to actually track physically in the data set, have a column in the data. And we added a column called data source in the Munster schemas a few years back. And so you should have a column there in our system which says data source, and you could put in anything you like in there. We just put the column there because we found we started rolling it out just about everywhere. So by default, we just put that in there. But here's an example of a customer, and this will be the one that I'll use, which literally goes from a value from 1 to 9, where 9 is good or the best, and 1 is nothing. And it runs through anything from a sketch and a field observation to as-built or as constructed, and then a survey level and field verified. So the same approach in essence as quality levels A through D, but just based on where did the data come from. And that can get tracked within your data set, because if you have a data set, some features may be surveyed and field verified, whereas others may be just unverified or just from a drawing. And so each feature, you want that in the column, and you can then roll that up. The other thing from that is the critical information determines prioritization. So typical things would be age, size, cost, or risk. Sometimes size, if it's pipes, a large pipe would be assumed to have a higher risk. So you can determine these. I'm not saying these are what the only ones they are. I'll show you an example of what's been used for some customers. Also the data disciplines. Maybe you're not really interested in the accuracy of the road center lines. You just kind of have that on your map because it's something that's, forms the fabric of your town, and you don't track it, you don't build those in that case, or maybe you do, but just to use an example. So the level of accuracy, you just want to know, do you have all the road center lines? But you're not worried about it, what the accuracy is. But you might want to know, do they all have street names, for example? So each discipline has different levels of things to look at it. So let's just go back to the data. So say you have some data. I'm actually showing you, these are all Munster tables. If you're familiar with that, you'd recognize many of these table names. But here's what we would say would be a pretty complete data. So if I selected that line, it's a stormwater pipe, and it has a diameter, a type, a material, a start node, an end node. So it's a connected network. It has all of the elevation and ground levels. It has information about its status being active. We've got a contract number, a year, data source, who owns it, other stuff, the SUE levels, dates surveyed. And so this is pretty complete information. So this would be about as good as you're going to get. So we're pretty confident. So if all your data was like that, you'd be very confident in knowing, where it is. However, it's not like that. So this is slightly different. Just a word before we get into data quality and completeness. So in Munster, we have, probably all of, 8, 10 years ago, we introduced Munster Lineage. That's a different thing than this. And I just mention it here. Lineage is about tracking individual edits, and we do that on a per feature basis, right? And so that's a slightly different thing. What I'm talking about today is tracking the quality and completeness of your data set in its entirety over time. Like, have you filled it out? So for example, if we look at this, just going from that stormwater stuff, if we look for that customer, this is another slice through the data. This is taking the age column on those stormwater pipes and mapping out, well, what did they build when? Okay, so just playing a little time warp on you. They built a lot in the late 90s, and in the 50s they built a lot. The problem, the reason I'm showing you this is, here's the thing: if you're making decisions on which pipes to replace, the problem lies down here. The blank and zeros make up more than 30% of this data set. So quite frankly, you don't know. You're making a decision on data with 70% confidence. That's a problem, right? So if you go on the map and in the GIS, we say, well, let's just show all pipes that don't have diameter. No, these ones are with pipes with no year, so no age idea. We don't have any age idea. But you can see there's a certain set. So if you're building anything in this area, you might want to know, about that. Or if there's a lot of leaks here, you might want to improve that quality and go and look at the age. So just to give you an idea, spatially, we go from those two maps, that one there where we can look at and see what we've got, and here where we can look at what we don't have. What we want to do is measure, 5 years from now, how much of this, purple color is going to be on the map, and is that an important data thing to track? And so that's essentially what I'm talking about here. So let's move on then. If we aggregate this data, you can look at, say, I'll just use storm pipes in this instance. You can look at various aspects. So the topology here is important because we want to know where the drainage goes. This, as you could see, this was an airport, purposely hidden as to which airport, but it's drainage is a big challenge because airports are flat and drainage presents all sorts of trouble. And so, you kind of want to know that. So it's fairly critical for them to have a connected network where they can know it's going to track and drain. Year is important, diameter, material. In this case, owner has been tracked just because the airport actually rents out and folks that occupy bits of land. And then we've got just using the levels B or better. Notice also that, and this is the first sort of one of the principles, we're tracking data with whatever the aspect is. So you can always say, well, what are we missing or what do we have? And the methodology we're using is tracking what we have. So these little charts down below mean that 76% of the storm pipes have start and end node. So this is what we have, okay? So we only have 8% of the quality being A or B. And so that kind of gives you an idea. So this is what we want to track. And you have to be consistent across every metric. You either track what you don't have or what you do have. It's just a whole lot easier doing a percentage of what you do have than what you don't have. So, and also it adds up to a few other things, and when we put it to an actual score as a set of improvements. So it's better to show your improvement that way around. Anyway, it's one way. So let's jump right into the stats. So I've shown you data on the feature, but if we roll that up into what I'd call stats. So for, say, the stormwater pipe, here's some of the things that this customer is tracking. So right at the bottom, you'll see, and this is an assessment done on a specific date. And the sorts of things I'm talking about is pretty much you do it once a year or once a quarter or once before a project and after a whole major project. That's kind of what you would do, but it's detailed. So right at the bottom, stormwater pipes. So the total length of their pipes was 60,000 something, and that was in 2018. So that's a benchmark. That's a fact of record, and maybe 10 years time they're going to have way different than 60,000 linear units of whatever these pipes are. So there's that. And then you can look at, well, what are we missing and what's the total length of, and how many of them are there, and all of that. So this is the sort of level of detail. And actually, I think for this customer, there's about 240 of these things that we measure. It's very detailed. You don't have to measure them, but and in the actual scoring at the end, we don't actually account for all of them, but we do track them. So there's a set of tables that we just add, and we track all these metrics, and we assign each assessment a assessment date from there, and you'll see the reports have got IDs, so we can run that, because then that same query can get run. And if you then go a little further, you can take those for stormwater. Here's an example of an aggregation. So it's still the 2018 assessment. Storm pipes with contract year. This is what I was showing you in that chart just a minute ago. There were 4,500 storm pipe segments with 2,320 of them actually have a value for contract year. So 51% have this data in it. Notice we put in a weighting factor because we built this in so that later on or at any given time we can say, you know what, we actually don't really want to count a given value. Maybe owner's not important, right? So we could make that 0. Or we could go in here to contract year and make that 2 or 3. Okay, and the weighting factor gives you a score. At the moment, they're all 1, so literally the score is the same as a percentage. Fairly simple, but just bear in mind, you might want to put a weighting factor so that we can actually prioritize, and it allows you later on to come and do some evaluation stats where you can just tweak those. So moving from this chart then, this is what I call metrics of data, and so we do that then for each of the features. So in this instance, it was an airport and linear features and point features. So for each of them, you essentially got 5 or 6 parameters like this, and then you can get to measure that. So for this one, we got these data sets and we're measuring 6 of them. We could just take an average of those scores and we would then roll that up into a value for drainage pipes. We would have a percentage that would be the average of all of these, right? And so you can build that out. So that's essentially going from the actual feature data to the summary stats to getting a score. The score would be where we roll that up. So how complete, and looking at score and trends in feature class. We should also talk about how much. It does, if you add a whole new set of data and you include it, just knowing that you've now got twice as many of these things as you had 4 years ago, that does in fact impact stuff. So we just put how much, the count of these, the count of those, and look at point line and area features, just how much, what's the total length. It's kind of a great executive thing. You just look at the trend. And then we talk about how good. So how good, I mentioned locational. One of the things to do is to go with this example on the airport here. We actually went and took a subset, the 10% of a given area, and said, let's compare what's in the data set to what's in the ground, and ran that. And so there's 2 things to do. There's just, if it's on the map, does it exist? Can you find it? And then if it's on the map, do the attributes within the data match what have been observed within the ground? And then lastly, how accurate, how close is it on the map to where you actually found it? So this gives you an idea of how good, and that's sort of a after the fact where you compare reality to what's in your data set. That's sort of the how good part of the quality. So there's completeness, there's just a metric of how big, how much, and then how good. And we can take then those aggregate scores and roll those up into a single measure. And so at any given time, say 2018 was the example I used, we would have a measure. We've got a number, a rolled up number that sort of aggregates all of these all the way up to give us a number. And so that you can then track over time. How does that vary? And of course you can drill down. So let me show you how that works. So let's start. Here's just data, right? This is just metrics within the data set. And this would change as somebody edits something. We would track the edit in Lineage, so we know, oh yeah, somebody added a 24-inch here or this type of pipe. But this is just a summary. It's a live read, right? This is not actually what we're interested in here. It's very useful, and it's sometimes useful to give you an idea what's missing. Like here's unverified, big box. That's probably a problem for material. And quality level, they've got a huge chunk, like nearly 2/3 is bad. So if you took C and D, that's 2/3 to 3/4 of their data is pretty bad level of confidence on the quality. So that's a challenge, and then that's useful to know, but it's not actually a way of measuring on an ongoing basis. You can also look and run. So these are, by the way, the last 3 slides and this one are standard Munsis templates for Power BI that we produced 4 or 5 years ago. And you can tweak them as well, but they do a couple of things. They just give you like a live read, and it's nice because you can drill down and cut through and get summary tables and all of that. But also there's some intelligence in there, like number of pipes with no start and end invert elevation, or pipes with or without. So this one says in the Power BI templates, as opposed to data quality, in Power BI templates, we show those ones that don't have. So 0 is a good thing. Whereas for data quality, we actually use those that do have. Just a little flip of the stats there if you're a statistician. But within those Power BI things, and then we use many of those within the data quality, these are the sorts of things that we're tracking. Total lengths, and in fact, this customer did 2018 and 2020, so you can see the 2 colors represent 2 different snapshots, okay? And so PVC, they improve, and it gives you different insights. But back to the actual score then. So this is water pipes, Aldu Storm and water, but here we've got the 6 metrics. And so if you take all the dark blue ones in 2018, including segment start and end node, contract year, diameter, material, SU level, and water category. In 2018, they had an aggregate value. If you average all of these out, in 2018 it was 65, now it's 76. So you can carry that number, 65 and 76, you carry those for each time period. You can roll that up and say for water pipes, the score in 2018 would have been 65, and here it would be 76, right? So that's improved, and that's always good to see that line go up, and it's great to show, executive management, etc. And you can do the same for point features. So here's nodes, and so once again we're looking at non-isolated, so these are ones that we know are connected, and looking at some of the elevation information over here. So in 2018 they had nothing, in 2020 they got a high number, and that contributes to this thing moving up a fair amount, and all of them have either stayed the same or got better. So you're getting better, and that's useful to know. You also know you've got a ways to go. You're only at 54%. Here's an example, a customer where we tracked from 2009 to 2017, and then actually that 2018 to 2020 was another major data improvement, because they saw they were just flatlining over the years. And interestingly enough, this one, obviously the Munsis operator running stormwater was not doing integrity checks. Also, we added more data at that point, so it's not entirely accurate to say they weren't doing a good job, because they got a whole lot more new stuff and it was incomplete. And so there is that, and that's kind of why we track how much. But definitely improved with the SU level, improved with some of the elevations, etc. But it's useful to see that trend. So same thing then for water and storm. If you're then in the middle and you just want to look per discipline, these are just looking across the board here. There's 8 different disciplines here, and each one of them is improved. So the GIS folks here are definitely improving their data set pretty much. Not a lot, there's still a ways to go, but they're improving. Okay. Sorry, that was total length and added. So they added a bunch of data, but here you can see the improvement. Every single one has improved in its quality and measure and score. So that's useful. So then you can go a little further. You can roll all of the points and lines and take their aggregate score. So here, we'd have the same one here for this is points and lines, but you can take that and roll that up for all of them and get a number. So that number then can be a value, and the value is fairly simple. So for this customer, they spent a couple of years doing surveys in about half of their airport within the secure areas, so basically where the airplanes are, over a 2-year period, and it improved their data set a lot, but they've still got a ways to go. So this is the number that the executives can look at and say, you know what, we have improved. And so that's sort of just a really quick way on going from feature data to summary stats. So you look at features, identify the aspects you're interested in, summarize those, and then you'll know how complete and what the score is. And you can then go and put in a weighting factor and then aggregate that and roll that all the way up to a number over here, and then compare one to the other in terms of timing. All right, so here's a question. Is this available right now? Yes, we've rolled this out to a few customers. It's not a standard product because we do tweak it for whatever the priorities are, and so they essentially boils down to some consulting time that we would do with the customer to roll that out, and we script it out, apply it across the board, and then within Munsis Management Console you can schedule events, and we could actually put those reports in within that structure. So we haven't productized it, but we have kind of got a framework that's pretty easy to roll out and would require some consulting time on your side. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. If you need more information, feel free to contact us. openspatial.com and asconstructed.com are our primary websites. You can take a look at that, and then we will be having a number of other webinars, by the way. So if you've seen this one, then you would also be familiar with the other ones coming up. If you look at openspatial.com and the events news page, I guess this one will drop off today. But there's other factors like using standards and CAD to GeoBIM, digital automation coming up as well. So you can look at that there, and we add this all the time. So just so you know about that. Also, recently, and I mentioned in our product range, pushing your Munsis data and connecting to the Oracle Analytics Cloud. Here's some analysis, whole different thing. But this was looking at water breaks and relating those to soil types and to age and condition within pipe types and diameters, and looking at trends within that and what the longer term trends would be over time. So yeah, just some interesting stuff. Good. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it, and I look forward to having you at our next webinar.